I never thought my own son would betray me like that. The day I found him counting my money on stolen surveillance footage. The ache of that moment still claws at my chest like a jagged stone. I felt something inside me break forever. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning in my small Queens apartment felt heavier than the last. The radiator wheezed against January's bitter grip on New York. My arthritis made each step across the worn linoleum floor a reminder of time passing. The coffee maker gurgled, filling the silence with its familiar symphony. I shuffled through my routine like a ghost haunting her own life. The apartment held memories in every corner. Crayon marks on the kitchen wall from when Tommy was 4. A chip in the bathroom mirror from the day he threw his toy truck in a tantrum. These walls had witnessed laughter, tears, first steps, and broken promises. Now they watched me fold the same 3 sweaters, make the same single cup of coffee, and stare at the same phone that never rang. That Tuesday morning, I dressed carefully in my navy blue cardigan, the one Tommy complimented years ago. I combed my silver hair until it lay perfectly against my shoulders. Hope dressed me every day, even when my heart knew better. I called him, listening to the phone ring 4 times before his voicemail clicked on. His voice sounded distant, professional. Leave a message. Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom. Just checking in. Love you. My words hung in the empty apartment like dust motes in winter sunlight. I waited. The phone stayed silent. By 3 in the afternoon, my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez knocked softly. She held a handwritten invitation to her granddaughter's quinceañera celebration. Eleanor, please come. You've been alone too much. Her kind eyes crinkled with genuine concern. I clutched the invitation, feeling the rough texture of the paper between my trembling fingers. When was the last time someone had invited me anywhere? I texted Tommy immediately. Would you like to attend a neighborhood party with me this Saturday? It would mean everything. The message showed as read within minutes. No response came. That night, I sat surrounded by photo albums spread across my bed like fragments of a shattered mirror. Tommy at age 6, missing his front teeth, grinning from atop my shoulders during our trip to Coney Island. Tommy at 12, sullen but still allowing me to straighten his school tie. Tommy at 18, graduation day, his arm around my waist as we posed beneath the Brooklyn Bridge. When had his smile stopped reaching his eyes? When had his hugs become obligatory? The smell of his childhood bedroom still lingered in the spare room where I kept his things. Action figures lined the shelves next to dusty baseball trophies. His baby blanket, soft blue cotton worn thin from countless nights when monsters lived under his bed and only Mommy could chase them away. I pressed it against my cheek, remembering the weight of his small body curled against mine during thunderstorms. Money had always been tight, but love had been abundant. I worked 3 cleaning jobs to keep Tommy in good schools. My hands aged prematurely from bleach and scrubbing floors in Manhattan office buildings. I'd arrive home past midnight, feet aching, back screaming, but still found energy to help with homework, pack his lunch, kiss scraped knees better. You gave me everything. His 16-year-old voice echoed from memory. I know, Mom. I know. Oft? He'd said it while I darned holes in his socks because new ones weren't in the budget. Back then, gratitude lived in his voice. When had it died? I started remembering all the sacrifices with painful clarity. The Christmas when I wrapped empty boxes under our tree because every dollar had gone to Tommy's basketball camp fees. I told him Santa was running late. His excited face on Christmas morning when he found the single gift I'd managed, a used bicycle I'd painted red in the building's basement at 3 a.m., the time I sold my engagement ring, the only thing of value I owned, to pay for his college textbooks. I never told him. The day I gave him my car because his broke down before a job interview, leaving me to take 3 buses to work every day. The countless dinners I skipped so he could have seconds. Mom, can you help me out? Became his most common greeting. First it was pizza money, then rent assistance, then car payments. Emergency after emergency that only my money could solve. I emptied my savings account more times than I could count. I took out small loans against my Social Security benefits, telling bank officers they were for home repairs when they were really for Tommy's bills. The requests always came with updates about his life that felt scripted. "Work's going great, Mom. Just having some cash flow issues." His voice grew more distant with each call. Our conversations shortened to financial transactions. How much did he need? When would I send it? Click. When I tried to share my own struggles, the line went quiet. "Mom, I can't really talk right now." "Mom, that sounds tough, but..." "Mom, you're being dramatic again." The dismissals stung worse than slaps. My feelings became inconvenient interruptions to his financial emergencies. I remember the day my doctor found the irregular heartbeat, sitting in that sterile examining room, clutching my purse, wanting desperately to call someone. Tommy's phone went straight to voicemail. My sister lived in Florida now. Mrs. Rodriguez was visiting her own sick mother. I took the subway home alone, test results folded in my coat pocket, scared and invisible. The manipulation crept in so gradually, I almost missed it. "You don't understand how hard things are for me, Mom. Nobody else has parents who question everything." "Fine. Forget I asked. I'll figure it out myself." Each guilt trip left me feeling smaller, wrong for having needs or opinions or boundaries. My birthday passed 3 months ago. 72 years of life, celebrated with a store-bought cupcake and a single candle I lit myself. Tommy called 2 days later. "Oh man, Mom, I'm so sorry. Work's been crazy." But his social media showed pictures from a friend's birthday party that same weekend. He'd found time for that celebration. I started questioning everything about myself. Was I too needy? Too sensitive? Had I failed as a mother? The doubt crept through my bones like winter cold, settling deep and refusing to leave. I Googled how to be a better mother to adult children at 2 a.m, reading articles that made me feel more confused than before. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake calculating how much money I'd given Tommy over the years. The numbers made me dizzy. Thousands of dollars that could have been my security, my comfort, my small pleasures. Instead, they'd disappeared into his life, while mine grew smaller and quieter. Some nights I'd dream about my own mother, gone now for 15 years. She'd appear young and vital in my dreams, hanging laundry on our old fire escape, singing Spanish lullabies she'd learned from her grandmother. "Mija," she'd say in the dreams. A mother's love shouldn't make her disappear. I'd wake with tears on my pillow and her voice fading like smoke. The apartment felt smaller each day. Walls closed in while the world outside grew larger and more threatening. I stopped opening curtains. Sunlight felt too bright, too hopeful for someone who'd been reduced to an ATM machine by the person she loved most. I began eating dinner in front of the television, watching game shows where families hugged and celebrated each other's victories. The contestants seemed to genuinely enjoy being together. Their laughter sounded foreign to my ears. When had I last laughed with Tommy? When had he last asked about my day, my health, my dreams? The silence in my apartment became a living thing. It pressed against my chest during meals, whispered accusations during sleepless nights, followed me to the bathroom mirror where I stared at a woman I barely recognized. When had my eyes grown so tired? When had my smile disappeared so completely? Shopping for groceries became an ordeal of careful calculations. Generic brands, day-old bread, coupons clipped with arthritic fingers that sometimes dropped things I couldn't retrieve from high shelves. Meanwhile, Tommy posted pictures of expensive dinners, weekend trips, new clothes. My money transformed into his lifestyle while I counted pennies for cat food I couldn't afford to buy. Mrs. Rodriguez began leaving plates of rice and beans outside my door. Pride made me want to refuse, but hunger made me grateful. She never mentioned it, just smiled when she saw me in the hallway. "Good morning, Eleanor. Beautiful day, no?" Her kindness felt like sunlight in a tunnel. I started having conversations with Tommy's childhood photographs. "You were such a sweet boy," I'd whisper to his 5th-grade school picture. "You wrote me poems for Mother's Day. You braided dandelions into crowns and declared me queen of the universe." The boy in the photograph smiled back, innocent and loving. Where had that child gone? One afternoon, unpacking groceries with shaking hands, I dropped a jar of pasta sauce. It exploded across the kitchen floor, red splattered like blood on white linoleum. I stood among the mess and sobbed. Not for the sauce or the money wasted, but for the woman I'd lost somewhere along the way. The woman who'd once felt strong enough to raise a son alone. The woman who'd believed love could conquer anything. Cleaning up that mess on my hands and knees, I felt something shift inside me. A tiny spark of anger flickered to life. Not rage exactly, but recognition. I deserved better than this lonely existence. I deserved phone calls that weren't requests for money. I deserved to matter. That's when I decided to install the security camera. It seemed innocent enough. A small device Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson helped me set up. "For peace of mind, Abuela Eleanor," he said, programming my phone with the app. "Now you can see who comes to your door when you're not home." I thought it would help me feel safer. I never imagined it would shatter my heart completely. The camera captured everything with brutal clarity. The way Tommy used his key to enter my apartment while I was at my doctor's appointment. The casual way he walked through rooms he'd grown up in, now treating them like a store he owned. The methodical search through my bedroom, my dresser drawers, the shoebox where I kept emergency cash. But seeing him count my money I'd saved from skipping meals, from walking instead of taking buses, from buying generic medications, that image burned itself into my retinas forever. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework, where we'd shared countless meals, where I'd wrapped his Christmas presents. His fingers moved through 20s and 10s with practiced efficiency. Not hurried, not guilty, just counting what he apparently considered his inheritance. The worst part was his expression. Calm, entitled. Like he was organizing his own wallet. No shame creased his features. No gratitude softened his eyes. This was routine. I watched the footage 3 times, hoping I'd misunderstood. Maybe he was organizing my money for me? Maybe he was replacing bills with newer ones? My heart grasped for innocent explanations while my brain processed the truth. My son was stealing from me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair holding a cup of tea I never drank, staring at shadows on the wall. The boy who'd once promised to take care of me when I was old had been taking care of himself instead, with my money, in my home, behind my back. Morning came gray and cold. I dressed carefully, choosing words I'd never thought I'd need. When Tommy arrived for his weekly visit, which I now realized was his weekly collection, I was ready. "I know you took money from my bedroom." The words fell between us like stones into still water. Tommy's face cycled through expressions: surprise, denial, calculation, and finally, defiance. "Mom, you're imagining things again. Again." As if my concerns were symptoms of senility rather than responses to his behavior. As if loving him had made me delusional. "I have it on camera, Tommy." His mask slipped for just a moment. I saw fear flicker across his features before anger replaced it. "You're spying on me now? Your own son?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. Somehow, I'd become the villain in his story. The mother who'd given him everything had become the enemy for catching him taking more. "After everything I do for you," he continued, voice rising, "I check on you. I visit when I can. And this is how you thank me? By treating me like a criminal?" I wanted to fold. Every instinct trained by years of his manipulation screamed at me to apologize, to smooth things over, to pretend I'd never seen what I'd seen. But something had changed in me. The woman who'd cleaned that pasta sauce off her floor with dignity and tact was still there, still fighting. When did checking on me become taking my money without asking? "You would have said no." The truth exploded out of him, raw and revealing. "You would have made me explain everything, made me feel guilty for needing help. It was easier this way. Easier for him. Always easier for him." I realized with crystalline clarity that I'd been enabling this behavior for years. Every unquestioned loan, every crisis I'd solved with my checkbook, every boundary I'd dissolved to keep him happy. "You need to leave," I heard myself say. The words surprised us both. "Mom, come on. Don't be dramatic. It's not like you need the money for anything important." Not important. My financial security wasn't important. My peace of mind wasn't important. My right to control my own resources wasn't important. Only his needs mattered. "Leave. Now." He stood slowly, 6 feet tall and powerful, trying to intimidate me into compliance. Once, it would have worked. Once, I would have crumbled under his disapproval. But I'd already crumbled as far as I could go. There was nowhere left to fall. "Fine," he said, keys jingling in his pocket. "But when you're sitting here alone, don't call me." The threat that should have terrified me felt oddly liberating. I was already alone. His visits had become invasions. His calls had become extractions. True solitude might actually feel less lonely than this performance of family connection. The door slammed behind him hard enough to rattle my windows. I sat in the sudden quiet, waiting for regret to wash over me. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. That evening, I called the bank. "I need to change my account access," I told the customer service representative. "Remove all authorized users except myself." It felt like unlocking chains I hadn't realized were binding me. Next, I changed the locks. Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson helped again, his kind eyes asking no questions when I explained I needed privacy. The sound of new keys in my palm felt like music. Within a week, Tommy called. Not to apologize, but to announce his dire need for rent money. "My landlord's being a real jerk about late fees," he said, assuming I'd respond as I always had. "Can you help me out? The usual amount should cover it." No. The word sat between us on the phone line like a foreign object. I'd never simply refused him before. I'd explained, apologized, negotiated, but never just said no. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, I won't be sending money." "Mom, this is serious. I could get evicted." "Then you'll need to find another solution." The manipulation started immediately. "I can't believe you're doing this to me. After everything we've been through together. I thought family meant something to you." Family did mean something to me. It meant enough to demand respect from it. It meant enough to refuse to be diminished by it. It meant enough to require reciprocity, not just extraction. "Family means I raised you to be capable of handling your own problems," I said. "I have faith you'll figure it out." He hung up. 3 days later, he called back with a different strategy. Sweetness replaced anger. "Mom, I'm sorry about the other day. I was stressed, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." The apology I'd craved for months felt hollow now, tactical rather than genuine. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully. "So we're good? Can you help with the rent situation? I promise I'll pay you back." There it was. The transaction disguised as reconciliation. The same pattern that had defined our relationship for years. Fight, apologize, extract, repeat. "No, Tommy. We're not good, and I won't be helping with rent." This time I hung up. The silence that followed felt different from before. Not empty, but full of possibility. I made myself tea and sat by my window, watching life move through the streets of Queens. People walked dogs. Children played in the small park across the street. Couples held hands waiting for buses. Life was happening all around me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I might be part of it again. I started small. A walk around the block. Coffee with Mrs. Rodriguez on her fire escape. A library book I read for pleasure instead of distraction. My sister Carmen called from Florida. We'd lost touch when her conversations became too painful. Her stories of family dinners and grandchildren who visited willingly highlighted everything missing from my own life. "Eleanor, how are you really?" she asked, and I heard genuine concern in her voice. "You've sounded so sad lately." I told her everything. The money, the camera footage, the confrontation, the boundary I'd finally drawn. "Good," she said firmly. "It's about time." Good? I'd expected sympathy for my loss, not celebration of my decision. "Mija, I've been watching you disappear for years. That boy was eating you alive, and you were letting him do it in the name of love. That's not love. That's consumption." Her words hit me like cold water. "But he's my son, and you're his mother, not his ATM. Mothers aren't supposed to be used up until there's nothing left." After we hung up, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked, maybe for the first time in years. Gray hair tangled from sleepless nights. Eyes red-rimmed from crying. Skin pale from hiding indoors. Shoulders curved inward from carrying too much weight, emotional and financial. But underneath the exhaustion, I glimpsed someone I'd forgotten. Eleanor. Not Tommy's mother or the building's quiet tenant, or Mrs. Rodriguez's sad neighbor. Just Eleanor, a woman with her own needs, dreams, and worth. I made an appointment at the salon down the street. The stylist, a chatty woman named Rosa with purple highlights, shampooed my hair with gentle hands. "What are we doing today, honey?" she asked, running fingers through my silver strands. "Something different," I said. "Something that makes me feel like myself again." An hour later, I walked out with a neat cut that framed my face and minimized the gray. In the salon mirror, I looked like a woman ready for something new. At the grocery store, I bought ingredients for meals I actually wanted to eat. Salmon instead of canned tuna. Fresh vegetables instead of frozen. Ice cream because I deserved small pleasures. The total on the receipt was higher than usual, but it was my money, and I was worth the investment. Tommy called again 2 weeks later. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Can I come over?" "We can talk on the phone," I said. "This is important. Family business. Family business. Code for another crisis requiring my financial intervention. Whatever you need to say, you can say it now." I heard him sigh dramatically. "Fine. Look, I've been thinking about everything that happened. Maybe I was a little insensitive about the money thing. A little insensitive. Stealing hundreds of dollars from your elderly mother was a little insensitive. But I want to make it up to you," he continued. "What if I took you out to dinner this weekend? That nice Italian place you like? The restaurant where I hadn't eaten in 2 years because I couldn't afford it after helping him with his various emergencies. How generous of him to offer to spend money on me. Money that was probably mine to begin with. That's very kind," I said. "But I have plans." "Plans?" He sounded genuinely surprised. When had I last had plans that didn't include him? "I'm busy this weekend." "Doing what?" The question revealed how little he knew about my life beyond my utility to him. When had he last asked what I did with my time, what I thought about, what I wanted? "Living my life," I said simply. That weekend, I took myself to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I hadn't been to a museum in years. Too expensive, too far, too indulgent. But riding the subway into Manhattan felt like an adventure. Walking through galleries filled with centuries of human creativity felt like coming home to a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. I stood for 20 minutes in front of a Georgia O'Keeffe painting, flowers that looked like abstract joy. An elderly man with a kind face and a museum volunteer badge noticed me lingering. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "She painted this when she was in her 70s. Said her best work came after she stopped trying to please everyone else." His words followed me home. Best work after stopping trying to please everyone else. Maybe there was still time for my best work, whatever that might look like. I started attending a senior book club at the library. 12 people who gathered weekly to discuss literature and share perspectives earned through decades of living. For the first time in years, people listened when I spoke. My opinions mattered. My insights had value. Margaret, a retired teacher with fierce eyes and a Brooklyn accent, became my closest friend in the group. She'd divorced her husband at 65 after 40 years of marriage. "Worst and best decision I ever made," she told me over coffee after one meeting. Worst because I had to rebuild everything. Best because I finally got to find out who I was without someone else defining me. "Wasn't it lonely?" I asked. "Honey, I'd been lonely for years while married to him. At least now my loneliness was honest." I understood exactly what she meant. Tommy continued calling, his tactics evolving like a sophisticated sales campaign. Guilt 1 week. I miss how close we used to be. Anger the next. "You're being ridiculous about this money thing." False emergencies. "I'm going to lose my job if I can't fix my car." Manipulation disguised as concern. "I'm worried about you, Mom. You're not acting like yourself." Maybe he was right. I wasn't acting like the version of myself he'd trained me to be. Endlessly giving, never requiring, constantly available for extraction. I was acting like someone who mattered. The holidays approached with dread coiled in my stomach. Thanksgiving had always been an elaborate performance. Me cooking for days, Tommy arriving late, eating quickly, and leaving early with containers of leftovers and any cash I could spare for his holiday expenses. This year, I made a reservation at a small restaurant in Greenwich Village that served traditional meals for people who didn't want to cook or didn't have family to cook for. The decision felt both liberating and terrifying. Tommy called the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. "So, what time should I come over? Want me to bring anything?" His tone suggested he expected everything to proceed as usual. "I won't be home for Thanksgiving," I said. "What do you mean?" "I made other plans." "With who?" Again, the assumption that my life existed only in relation to him, that without his presence, I had no existence worth mentioning. "With people who enjoy my company," I said. The restaurant was filled with others like me, people who'd chosen solitude over dysfunction, peace over performance. I sat at a small table by the window, watching foot traffic move through the village streets. My meal was delicious. The wine was exactly the right temperature. Nobody asked me for money, or ignored my feelings, or made me feel invisible. Walking home through the crisp November evening, I realized I felt genuinely thankful for the first time in years. Not grateful in the desperate way of someone trying to convince herself she wasn't miserable, but truly appreciative of choices I'd made and boundaries I'd maintained. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. "Can't believe you abandoned your own son on Thanksgiving." "Real nice, Mom." I deleted the message without responding. December brought a different kind of test. Christmas had always been my favorite holiday, the excuse to spoil Tommy, to show my love through expensive gifts I couldn't afford. I'd maxed out credit cards to make Christmas mornings magical, working extra cleaning jobs in January to pay off December's generosity. This year, I bought myself a small tree from the corner vendor who'd sold me trees for the past 15 years. "Just you this year, Mrs. See?" he asked kindly. "Just me," I confirmed, and it felt like a celebration rather than a concession. I decorated slowly, hanging ornaments Tommy had made in elementary school alongside new ones I bought just because they were beautiful. The tree looked perfect in my living room window, visible to neighbors passing below, a signal that life was being lived here. I bought Christmas cards and wrote notes to people who'd shown me kindness. Mrs. Rodriguez, Margaret from book club, Rosa from the salon, Carmen in Florida. Real messages to people who'd earned my gratitude, not obligatory holiday performances. Tommy called 2 weeks before Christmas. "I wanted to give you a heads up about your present," he said, voice warm with false intimacy. "It's something you've always wanted." I couldn't remember the last time he'd given me anything beyond worry and disappointment. His gifts had become increasingly symbolic over the years. Cheap perfume that made me sneeze, generic flower bouquets from gas stations, cards signed hurriedly in ballpoint pen. "You don't need to get me anything," I said. "Of course I do. You're my mother." As if that title guaranteed his generosity rather than my exploitation. "I'd rather you didn't. Mom, just because we had a little disagreement doesn't mean we can't have Christmas together." A little disagreement. Months of establishing boundaries became a little disagreement. My son stealing from me became a little disagreement. My transformation from doormat to human being became a little disagreement. "I'm spending Christmas differently this year," I said. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not available for visits or gift exchanges." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. "You know what, Mom? Fine. Have it your way. But when you're sitting alone on Christmas morning, don't expect me to feel sorry for you." Another threat disguised as consequence. More manipulation wrapped in concern. The old Eleanor would have crumbled. The new Eleanor recognized the pattern. "I won't be alone," I said. "I'll be with someone who enjoys my company." "Who?" "Myself." Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. I made pancakes, something I hadn't eaten in years because Tommy didn't like them, and I'd stopped cooking foods he wouldn't eat even when he wasn't there. The kitchen filled with the sweet smell of vanilla and butter. I opened my gift to myself, a set of watercolor paints I'd admired in an art store window. The brushes felt perfect in my arthritic fingers. The colors spread across paper like liquid possibilities. My first painting was terrible, a lopsided vase with flowers that looked like colorful weeds. But it was mine, created for my own pleasure, judged by my own standards, valuable simply because I'd made it. The phone stayed quiet all morning. No demands, no crises. No guilt trips disguised as holiday cheer. The silence felt like the most perfect Christmas gift I'd ever received. Margaret called in the afternoon. "How's your first free Christmas, honey?" "Peaceful," I said, and meant it. "Good. You earned it." That evening, Mrs. Rodriguez knocked softly. She handed me a plate of homemade cookies and a card written in careful English. "For my friend who teaches me courage." I cried reading it, but they were different tears than I'd shed all year. Happy tears. Grateful tears. Tears of recognition rather than pain. January brought a kind of settling, like a house finding its foundation after a storm. I'd established new routines that didn't revolve around Tommy's needs or crises. Morning walks around the neighborhood, afternoon art sessions with my watercolors, evening calls with Carmen, whose check-ins had become highlights of my week. Tommy's calls grew less frequent but more intense. When manipulation failed, he tried reverse psychology. You know what, Mom? Maybe this is better for both of us. Maybe I was too dependent on you. Maybe we both need space to grow. The script felt practiced, like something he'd rehearsed or read online about managing difficult parents. I was the difficult one now. Difficult for requiring respect. Difficult for maintaining boundaries. Difficult for refusing to finance his lifestyle while living on scraps myself. Maybe, I agreed, refusing to take the bait. I've been seeing someone, he added, waiting for me to ask questions, show interest, offer congratulations or concerns. That's nice, I said neutrally. Her name's Jessica. She's really great, independent, successful. Nothing like... He caught himself before finishing the comparison, but I heard it anyway. Nothing like you, Mom. Nothing like the dependent, giving, self-sacrificing woman I trained you to be. I'm happy for you, I said, and surprisingly, I meant it. Maybe Jessica would become his new source of financial and emotional support. Maybe she'd rescue him from the consequences of his choices while I learned to rescue myself from the consequences of mine. February brought my 73rd birthday. I'd dreaded it for weeks, remembering last year's silence, Tommy's forgotten calls, the loneliness of celebrating alone. This year, I planned ahead. I invited Margaret, Mrs. Rodriguez, and 2 other women from book club for dinner at the Italian restaurant Tommy had once offered to take me to. 5 women ranging in age from 68 to 81, sharing stories and laughter over wine and pasta. To Eleanor, Margaret raised her glass, who's showing all of us it's never too late to put yourself first. The toast made me blush, but also made me proud. When had I last felt proud of myself? When had anyone celebrated me for something other than my usefulness? My phone buzzed during dessert. A text from Tommy. Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry I can't call today. Busy with work stuff. Hope you have a good one. The message would have devastated me last year. This year, surrounded by genuine friendship and celebration, it felt like background noise. I showed the message to Margaret, who rolled her eyes. Honey, that boy wouldn't know love if it bit him on his entitled behind. We laughed until our sides hurt. Walking home through Queen streets lit by yellow streetlights, I felt lighter than I had in years. The women who'd celebrated with me had chosen to be there. They'd paid for their own meals, brought their own stories, shared their own laughter. No one had asked me for anything except my company. Spring arrived early, and with it came an unexpected call from Tommy. Mom, I need to see you. It's important. His voice carried a different quality. Not the practiced manipulation I'd grown accustomed to, but something that sounded almost like genuine emotion. We can talk on the phone, I said, maintaining the boundary that had protected me through winter. Please, this is different. I need to apologize properly. In person. Apologies had become weapons in his arsenal, tools for reopening wallets rather than healing wounds. But something in his tone made me hesitate. What's changed? I asked. Everything. Jessica and we broke up. She said some things that made me think about how I've been treating you, how I've been treating everyone. A breakup revelation. How many times had his relationship dramas become my emotional and financial emergencies? How often had other people's opinions of him mattered more than mine? I'm not available for relationship counseling, I said firmly. That's not what this is about. Mom, please. 1 hour. Just let me say what I need to say. Against my better judgment, against Margaret's advice, against every boundary I'd established, I agreed to meet him in a public place. The small coffee shop on Northern Boulevard where I'd started going for their excellent scones and quiet atmosphere. Tommy arrived 10 minutes late, looking thinner than I remembered. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His usually perfect hair needed cutting. For a moment, concern flickered through my resolve. Then I remembered. His problems were no longer mine to solve. You look good, Mom, he said, settling into the chair across from me. Different. Healthier. I did look different. Rosa had taught me to use a little makeup. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to highlight features I'd forgotten I had. My clothes fit better since I'd started cooking and eating proper meals. My posture had improved since I'd stopped carrying the weight of his financial crises. Thank you, I said, waiting. I've been thinking a lot since Jessica and I ended things. She said something that really bothered me. She said I treated people like resources instead of relationships. Resources. The word stung because it was accurate. I'd been his most reliable resource for 30 years. She said I took advantage of people who loved me. That I was... He paused, looking genuinely uncomfortable. That I was using you up. Using you up. Carmen had said almost the same thing months ago. Interesting how other people could see what had taken me decades to understand. What do you think? I asked. I think maybe she was right. About some things. I think maybe I've been taking you for granted. Taking me for granted seemed like a gentle way to describe theft, manipulation, and emotional abuse. But it was a start. I want to make things right between us, he continued. I want us to be close again. Close. We'd never been close, we'd been codependent. I'd been his financial safety net disguised as his loving mother. He'd been my purpose disguised as my precious son. What would that look like? I asked. I don't know. Different than before? Better. More. Equal, I guess. Equal. The word hung between us like a foreign concept he'd recently learned but didn't quite understand. I've missed you, he said, and for the first time in our conversation, he sounded completely sincere. Have you missed me? Or have you missed what I provided? The question seemed to surprise him. He stared into his coffee cup as if looking for answers in the dark liquid. I don't know, he said finally. I think maybe they were the same thing for so long that I can't tell the difference. His honesty was unexpected and oddly refreshing. At least he wasn't pretending he'd missed our deep conversations or shared interests or emotional intimacy. We'd never had those things. That's something you'll need to figure out, I said. Can you help me figure it out? And there it was. The request for me to do the emotional work of repairing a relationship he'd damaged. The assumption that healing our connection was my responsibility rather than his. No, I said gently. That's work you'll have to do yourself. He looked startled, as if he'd expected me to leap at the chance to fix things between us. The old Eleanor would have. The new Eleanor recognized that my job wasn't to manage his insights or guide his growth or make his emotional development easier for him. So what happens now? He asked. Now, you decide what kind of relationship you want with me, and I decide if I'm interested in that kind of relationship. What kind of relationship do you want? The question was fair, and I'd thought about it during many sleepless nights over the past months. I want a relationship where I matter as a person, not just as a provider. Where my feelings are considered, not just dismissed. Where the conversations flow both ways instead of just toward your needs. He nodded as if taking notes for a test he needed to pass. I can do that, he said. Can you? Or do you think you should be able to? Another question that seemed to catch him off guard. He was accustomed to promising changes rather than demonstrating them, to saying what people wanted to hear, rather than doing what relationships required. I guess we'll find out, he said. We talked for another 20 minutes about neutral topics. The weather, neighborhood changes, a movie he'd seen. He didn't ask for money. He didn't mention any pending crises. He asked about my art classes and seemed genuinely surprised to learn I was painting. You never showed interest in art before, he said. I never had time or energy for interests before. The implication hung in the air between us. My life had been consumed by his needs until there was no room for my own discoveries or growth or pleasure. When we parted, he hugged me, briefly, awkwardly, but without the calculating quality his physical affection had carried in recent years. It felt like human contact rather than manipulation. Can we do this again? He asked. Just coffee and talking? Maybe, I said, if you want to. I do want to. Then call me next week and we'll see. Walking home, I felt cautiously optimistic but not naive. One conversation didn't undo years of damage. Good intentions didn't automatically translate into changed behavior. But it was something, a crack in the wall he'd built between us. a possibility that hadn't existed before. Margaret was skeptical when I told her about the meeting. Honey, leopards don't change their spots just because someone breaks up with them. Maybe not, I agreed. But people can learn new patterns if they're motivated enough. And if they're not, then I'm still better off than I was 6 months ago. That was true. Regardless of what happened with Tommy, I'd learned to live independently, to value myself, to maintain boundaries. I'd discovered interests and friendships and small pleasures that didn't depend on his approval or participation. My worth wasn't contingent on his recognition of it. He called the following week as promised. Want to meet for coffee again? Same place? Actually, I said, why don't you come to my apartment? I'll make lunch. It was a test, and we both knew it. Could he enter my space without reverting to old patterns? Could he see me in my environment without automatically looking for opportunities to take advantage? He arrived on time carrying a small potted plant, a peace lily with white blooms and glossy leaves. I remember you always liked plants, he said, handing it to me. I thought maybe you'd like this one. I did like plants, though I'd stopped keeping them when I could no longer afford to replace the ones that died from neglect while I worked multiple jobs to support his lifestyle. The gesture felt thoughtful rather than calculated. Lunch was simple. Sandwiches and soup, nothing elaborate. We ate at the kitchen table where I'd once seen him counting my stolen money. The memory flickered through my mind like an old scar, noticed but no longer actively painful. The apartment looks different, he said, glancing around. Brighter. I'd been making small changes over the past months. New curtains that let in more light, plants on windowsills. My watercolor paintings framed and hung on walls that had been bare for years. The space reflected someone who lived there by choice rather than someone who merely waited there to be needed. I've been fixing it up, I said. It looks nice. Homey. Homey. When had my home stopped feeling homey to me? When had it become merely a base of operations for serving other people's needs? We talked about his job. He was doing well, had received a promotion, was managing his money better since Jessica had insisted he learn to budget. Her influence on his financial habits had achieved more in months than my decades of bailing him out had accomplished. I've been paying my own rent for 6 months now, he said with pride that would have been touching if it weren't describing basic adult responsibility he should have mastered years ago. That's good, I said. How does it feel? Scary at first, but now, I don't know. It feels like I actually earned my apartment instead of just living there because someone else was paying for it. Someone else. Me. I'd been paying for his housing while living in a space I could barely afford myself, but he was learning to earn what he once took for granted. Better late than never, I supposed. I owe you a lot of money, he said suddenly. The acknowledgement surprised me. He'd never called our financial arrangement debt before. It had always been help, assistance, family support. Gifts that came with guilt if I ever suggested repayment. Yes, I agreed. You do. I want to pay you back. It might take a while, but I want to do it. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. And because I don't want money to be weird between us anymore. Money had been weird between us for years, but only I had been allowed to feel weird about it. His comfort with our financial arrangement had depended on my silence about its unfairness. How much do you think you owe me? I asked. He pulled out a small notebook, the kind accountants use with neat columns and careful entries. I've been trying to calculate it, going back through old texts and calls where I asked for money. It's not exact, but I think it's somewhere around $12,000. $12,000. The number hit me like a physical blow, not because it was wrong, but because it was probably conservative. He'd been tracking only the explicit requests, not the cash I'd heard him take from my emergency fund when he thought I was sleeping, not the credit card bills I'd paid when his account was overdrafted, not the loans I'd taken against my Social Security to cover his crises. That sounds about right for the past 2 years, I said. What about before that? His face went pale. Before that? Tommy, you've been asking me for money since you were 25. You're 35 now. 10 years of emergencies and rent help and car payments and medical bills. The full scope of our financial history seemed to dawn on him for the first time. He'd never calculated the cumulative cost of his dependence because he'd never had to. Each request had existed in isolation, divorced from the pattern it was part of. I can't pay back 10 years' worth, he said quietly. I know. So, what do we do? You pay back what you can, when you can, without making it my problem to track or manage. And we don't let money become part of our relationship again. What if I have a real emergency? Then you'll handle it like every other adult handles emergencies. Insurance, savings, loans from banks, help from friends, but not from me. He looked stricken, as if I'd suggested he handle emergencies by performing magic tricks. What if it's really serious, like health stuff or job loss? Tommy, in 10 years of emergencies, how many were actually serious versus just inconvenient? He considered the question longer than I expected. Most of them were just things I didn't want to deal with myself, he admitted finally. Right. And dealing with your own problems is part of being an adult. But what if— No what ifs, I interrupted. This boundary isn't a negotiation. It's not a temporary rule until you prove yourself. It's permanent. I won't be your financial backup plan anymore. The finality in my voice seemed to reach him in a way months of arguments hadn't. He nodded slowly, reluctantly, but without the angry resistance I'd expected. Okay, he said. I understand. Do you? Or are you just agreeing because you think it's what I want to hear? He was quiet for a long moment. I think I understand why you need this rule. I don't like it, but I understand it. That was probably the most honest response he'd ever given me about anything difficult, not pretending to be happy about boundaries that inconvenienced him, but acknowledging their necessity. We spent the rest of the afternoon looking through old photo albums I'd put away months earlier. Pictures of Tommy at various ages, but also pictures of me, younger, more vibrant, smiling with genuine joy instead of exhausted obligation. You looked so happy here, he said, pointing to a photo from his high school graduation. In it, I'm beaming with pride, my arm around his shoulders, both of us grinning at the camera. I was happy, I said. I was proud of you. I thought we had a good relationship. What changed? I think I changed. I got tired. And you changed too. You started seeing me as a resource instead of a person. He traced the edge of the photograph with his finger. I don't remember deciding to do that. It just sort of happened. It happened gradually, one favor at a time, one crisis at a time, until asking me for money felt normal and I felt guilty for hesitating to give it. I made you feel guilty? I showed him text messages I'd saved on my phone. Months of manipulative exchanges I'd screenshotted when I started questioning my own perceptions. Mom, you don't understand how hard this is for me. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't desperate. Fine, forget I asked. I'll figure something else out. Followed an hour later by, actually, I really do need help, Mom. Please? Everyone else's parents help them out. I guess I just have different parents. Reading his own words seemed to affect him more than my descriptive complaints had. He could see the manipulation patterns laid out in black and white, transmitted through his own thumbs to my phone screen. I really said all that? Among other things. He put his head in his hands. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm really, really sorry. The apology felt different from his previous attempts. Heavier, more complete. Sorry for specific behaviors rather than sorry I was upset. Sorry for what he'd done rather than sorry I'd noticed. Thank you, I said. I accept your apology. Can you forgive me? I'm working on it. Forgiveness isn't something I can just decide to feel. It's something that grows over time when trust gets rebuilt. How do I rebuild trust? By being trustworthy, consistently, without expecting credit or recognition for doing what you should have been doing all along. He left that afternoon with a stack of his old belongings I'd been storing, childhood books, sports equipment, school papers I'd saved thinking he might want them someday. Cleaning out those boxes felt like shedding weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Over the following weeks, he called regularly. Not constantly, not with demands, but with the kind of casual check-ins that healthy adult children might make. He asked about my art classes, my book club, my friendship with Margaret. He shared details about his work, his new apartment, which he described with pride of ownership rather than entitlement, his attempts at cooking for himself. The conversations felt strange at first. What did we talk about when money wasn't the subtext? Who were we to each other when I wasn't his solution and he wasn't my project? Slowly, tentatively, We began discovering interests we shared. We both liked old movies, something I'd forgotten during years focused on his preferences. We both found cooking relaxing when it wasn't performed under pressure. We both had opinions about books, though we'd never discussed reading together before. One evening in May, he called with excitement in his voice. "Mom, I got approved for a small business loan. I'm going to start a landscaping company with my friend Mike." My first instinct was to worry about the risk, the debt, the possibility of failure that might lead him back to my door with his hand extended. But my second instinct was purely maternal pride. My son was taking initiative, making plans, building something of his own. "That's wonderful," I said. "Tell me about it." He talked for 20 minutes about plans and dreams and practical considerations. His enthusiasm was infectious and achingly familiar. It reminded me of the boy who'd once built elaborate fort structures in our living room, who'd planted a small garden in our fire escape planter box, who'd believed he could do anything. "I wish I'd done this years ago," he said. "Why didn't you?" "Because it was easier to let you fix my problems than to fix them myself. Because I got comfortable being taken care of." The admission hung between us like a bridge we'd both had to build from our separate sides. "Well," I said, "you're doing it now." "Yeah, finally." That weekend, he invited me to see his new apartment. Really see it, as his guest rather than his financial consultant. It was small but clean, furnished with pieces he'd bought himself or found secondhand. Plants I'd given him thrived on windowsills. Books filled a small bookshelf. The refrigerator held actual food instead of takeout containers and condiments. "I learned to cook," he said, showing me around the tiny kitchen. "Basic stuff, but I can make real meals." He fixed dinner for me, pasta with vegetables and a salad, nothing fancy but prepared with care. We ate at his small table while rain drummed against the windows. The conversation flowed without effort or agenda. "This feels normal?" he said suddenly. "What does?" "This. Just eating dinner and talking, like regular people do." Regular people. As opposed to the dysfunctional dynamic we'd maintained for years. Me giving, him taking, both of us pretending it was sustainable. "We are regular people," I said. "We just forgot how to be regular people together." Walking home through Queen streets shining with rain, I reflected on the strangeness of getting to know my own son. For 30 years, I'd thought I knew him completely. Now I was discovering he had depths I'd never explored, interests I'd never encouraged, capabilities I'd never allowed him to develop. The boy who'd been financially helpless was running his own business numbers. The young man who'd panicked at every setback was making concrete plans for handling challenges. The son who'd treated me like an ATM was learning to value me as a person. Margaret was cautiously optimistic when I shared updates about our improving relationship. "I'm glad he's growing up," she said. "But don't forget you grew up too. Don't shrink back to fit his old image of you." Her warning was wise. It would be easy to slip back into familiar patterns, to start managing his emotions or solving his problems or accepting less than I deserved, because our new dynamic felt so much better than our old one. But I'd learned too much about my own worth to surrender it again. I'd discovered too much about healthy boundaries to dissolve them for anyone's comfort. I'd found too many interests and friendships and sources of joy to sacrifice them for a relationship that required my diminishment. Summer brought new challenges and new growth for both of us. Tommy's business struggled in its early months. Equipment problems, difficult clients, cash flow issues that would have automatically become my emergencies in the past. He called to share his frustrations, but he didn't ask me to solve them. He vented and problem-solved and figured things out, the way adults do when they don't have a backup plan named Mom. I started taking weekend trips, short excursions to upstate New York towns, the Jersey Shore, Connecticut museums. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Margaret or other friends from book club. Each trip felt like a small rebellion against years of being too broke or too emotionally exhausted to leave my neighborhood. In July, Carmen visited from Florida. She hadn't seen me in person for 3 years, and her reaction to my transformation was gratifying. "Mija, you look like yourself again," she said, hugging me at LaGuardia Airport. "I was so worried I'd lost my sister to that boy's selfishness." We spent a week being tourists in my own city, museums, Broadway shows, Dinners in restaurants I'd never afforded when my money was flowing elsewhere. Carmen insisted on paying for everything. "It's my turn to spoil my big sister," she said when I protested. "You spent so many years taking care of everyone else. Let someone take care of you." Being taken care of felt foreign, but wonderful. Having someone consider my preferences, anticipate my needs, insist on my comfort. When had that last happened? When had anyone centered my happiness the way Carmen did during that visit? Tommy met us for lunch one afternoon, and I watched my sister's keen eyes assess him throughout the meal. He was polite, attentive, interested in her stories about Florida retirement communities and her new hobby of competitive bridge. He paid for everyone's meals without fanfare, mentioning casually that business was picking up. After he left, Carmen was quiet for several minutes. "He seems different," she said finally. "Different how?" "Like he sees you. Before, it was like you were furniture to him. Useful, taken for granted, invisible unless he needed something. Today, he seemed to actually notice you were there." Her observation was apt. Tommy had asked about my art, complimented a necklace I was wearing, remembered details from previous conversations. Small gestures, but they indicated a level of attention he'd never paid me before. "People can change," I said. "Some people can," Carmen corrected, "when they want to badly enough. The question is whether the change will stick when it stops being new and interesting. Only time would tell, I supposed. But even if Tommy reverted to old patterns, I wouldn't. I'd learned too much about self-respect to unlearn it for anyone's convenience. August brought an unexpected test when Tommy's business partner was injured in an accident, leaving Tommy to handle contracts and equipment maintenance alone. The stress and increased workload put enormous pressure on his still fragile financial situation. He called me one evening, and I could hear exhaustion in his voice. "I'm not asking for money," he said immediately. "I know that's not an option anymore. I needed to talk to someone who would understand." He told me about 16-hour workdays, about learning skills he'd never needed before, about the temptation to give up and find an easier job working for someone else. "But I don't want to quit," he said. "For the first time in my life, I'm building something that's mine. It's hard, but it's mine." I listened without offering solutions or advice or financial rescue. I just listened, the way I wished someone had listened to me during my hardest years. "You'll figure it out," I said when he finished. "You're stronger than you think you are." "How do you know?" "Because you're my son, and I raised you to be capable even when I forgot to let you prove it." That conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. For the first time, he'd called me for emotional support rather than financial assistance. For the first time, I'd been able to offer that support without resentment or fear of being used. September marked 1 year since I'd first seen the security footage of him taking my money. The anniversary passed quietly, without fanfare. But I noted it. 12 months of learning to value myself. 12 months of maintaining boundaries. 12 months of discovering who I was when I wasn't being drained by others' needs. The woman who'd nearly disappeared into servitude and self-sacrifice was still there, but she was no longer in charge. She'd been replaced, or perhaps rescued, by someone who understood that love didn't require the sacrifice of self-worth, that generosity shouldn't lead to self-destruction, that mothers were allowed to matter as much as the children they raised. Tommy's business survived its crisis and began to thrive. He hired 2 employees and rented a small office space. His pride in these accomplishments was evident and infectious. When he talked about his work now, I heard echoes of the boy who'd once built elaborate structures from blocks and announced them proudly to anyone who would listen. October brought another invitation, this one from Tommy himself. "Would you like to see the office?" he asked. "Maybe meet my employees? I know it's not much, but it's mine, and I'd like to show it to you." The office was indeed small, 2 rooms above a hardware store in Astoria, with mismatched furniture and equipment that had seen better days. But it was clean, organized, and clearly the result of hard work and careful planning. Tommy introduced me to his employees, 2 young men who spoke respectfully about their boss and enthusiastically about their projects. They showed me photographs of completed landscaping jobs, budget spreadsheets, scheduling charts that managed multiple clients across Queens and Long Island. "Your son knows what he's doing," one of them told me. He's teaching us the business while he learns it himself. It's pretty cool. Driving home from that visit, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in Tommy's growth and accomplishments, gratitude for his healing and evolution, but also a bittersweet recognition of years lost to dysfunction that could have been years of mutual growth and support. If I'd established boundaries earlier, would he have learned responsibility sooner? If I'd required respect from the beginning, would we have built genuine intimacy instead of transactional dependence? If I'd valued myself more, would he have learned to value others? The questions were unanswerable and ultimately unhelpful. We were where we were, having learned what we'd learned, ready for whatever came next. That had to be enough. November brought my first Thanksgiving in years that felt genuinely celebratory. Tommy invited me to his apartment for dinner, not a performance or obligation or manipulation, but an actual expression of gratitude for our improving relationship. He'd attempted to cook a complete Thanksgiving meal himself, with mixed but charming results. The turkey was slightly dry, the stuffing was too salty, and the cranberry sauce came from a can. But the table was set with care: fall flowers arranged in a mason jar, candles lit against the early darkness. "Thank you," he said as we sat down to eat. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For setting boundaries I was too selfish to recognize I needed. For teaching me that loving someone doesn't mean letting them use you up." The gratitude in his voice was earned rather than performed. He understood now what I'd lost in our old dynamic, what I'd risked by changing it, what both of us had gained from his growth. "Thank you for doing the work to change," I replied. "It would have been easier to stay angry or keep blaming me for setting limits. You chose to grow instead." That evening, as I rode the subway home through Queens streets lit by early holiday decorations, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this place. The pain of discovering his betrayal had felt unbearable at the time. The loneliness of establishing boundaries had seemed like a punishment. The uncertainty of rebuilding our relationship had terrified me. But pain had forced growth. Loneliness had revealed strength. Uncertainty had created space for something healthier than what we'd had before. I wasn't the same woman who'd watched security footage of her sons stealing her money. I wasn't the mother who'd sacrificed her well-being for her child's convenience. I wasn't the person who'd believed love required the surrender of self-worth. I was someone who mattered, to myself, to my friends, and increasingly to my son, in ways that were healthy and sustainable. December arrived with snow and the gentle satisfaction of perspective. This year's Christmas preparations felt joyful rather than obligatory. I bought presents for people who genuinely cared about me: Margaret, Mrs. Rodriguez, Carmen, Rosa from the salon, book club friends who'd become family of choice. For Tommy, I chose something meaningful, but not expensive: a small framed photograph of us from his business office opening, both of us smiling genuinely, looking like people who enjoyed each other's company. He gave me something even more valuable: a handwritten letter thanking me for specific ways I'd supported him throughout his life, acknowledging specific ways he'd failed to appreciate that support, and promising specific changes he'd already begun making. "I know this doesn't erase the hurt I caused," he wrote, "but I want you to know that I see it now. I see you now, and I'm grateful for the mother who loved me enough to stop enabling me." Christmas morning, I woke up not to silence or dread, but to anticipation of a quiet day filled with small pleasures. I made pancakes again, painted for an hour in the morning light streaming through my kitchen window, called Carmen to wish her well, and prepared for Tommy's afternoon visit with actual excitement rather than anxious performance. When he arrived, he looked around my apartment with appreciation rather than calculation. "It feels peaceful here," he said. "Like someone happy lives here." Someone happy did live there. Finally. We spent the afternoon looking through photo albums, but this time the memories felt like treasures rather than evidence of loss. Tommy had been a delightful child, and I had been a devoted mother. Our old relationship hadn't been all dysfunction. There had been genuine love, laughter, and connection. I'd simply forgotten those elements existed beneath years of accumulated resentment and exhaustion. "I have something else for you," he said as the day wound down. He handed me an envelope containing a check for $500. "It's not much compared to what I owe you overall," he said. "But it's the first installment on paying you back. I want to give you something every month until we're even." The gesture mattered more than the amount. He was taking responsibility for our financial history rather than expecting me to forget it. He was treating our relationship like something worth investing in rather than something to exploit. "You don't have to," I started. "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "I know you're not requiring this, but I am. I need to pay my debts to feel right about myself. I need to give back to you to feel like I deserve your forgiveness." That evening, after he'd gone home, I sat with my cup of tea and reflected on the year that had changed everything. The shattering discovery that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning. The boundaries I'd established to protect myself had created space for both of us to grow. The relationship I'd thought I was losing had been replaced by something better, something based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. Not every story like mine has this kind of resolution, I knew. Not every selfish adult child learns to value their parent as a person. Not every boundary-setting effort results in improved relationships. Sometimes, protecting yourself from family dysfunction means accepting permanent distance or estrangement. But sometimes, if you're patient enough, if you're strong enough, if you're lucky enough, the family member who's been using you learns to love you instead. Sometimes the relationship you save by insisting on respect becomes more valuable than the relationship you lost by accepting disrespect. January brought a settling into routines that felt sustainable rather than exhausting. Tommy and I talked regularly without crisis or drama. I pursued interests that fed my soul rather than obligations that drained it. My friendships deepened as I had more emotional energy to invest in people who invested in me. I'd learned to recognize the warning signs of unhealthy dynamics before they consumed me. When book club members occasionally asked for favors that felt one-sided, I politely declined. When neighbors hinted at needing financial help, I recommended community resources instead of opening my wallet. When new acquaintances seemed more interested in my usefulness than my friendship, I declined to invest further in those relationships. Setting boundaries had become a skill rather than a traumatic confrontation. I'd learned to protect my resources, financial, emotional, and spiritual, without guilt or lengthy explanations. No had become a complete sentence I could speak with kindness but without apology. The woman who'd once convinced herself that love required self-sacrifice now understood that healthy love enhances rather than diminishes both parties. The mother who'd believed that giving everything proved her devotion now knew that giving appropriately modeled self-respect for her child. Some evenings, I still looked at old photographs and felt glad for the journey we'd traveled together, from dysfunction to health, from exploitation to respect, from codependence to genuine love. The path had been painful, but the destination was worth every difficult step. My story began with betrayal filmed by a security camera, but it ended with transformation witnessed by an entire community of people who'd learned to value what I had to offer. It started with a son who saw his mother as a resource and evolved into a young man who treasures his mother as a person. Most importantly, it transformed a woman who'd lost herself in others' needs into someone who understands that her own life has meaning, value, and purpose beyond what she can provide to other people. The camera footage that broke my heart ultimately helped me find my backbone. The money my son stole became the foundation for self-respect I'd never learned to build. The relationship I nearly lost by insisting on boundaries became stronger than the relationship I'd maintained by accepting mistreatment. Today, I'm counting something more valuable than the money Tommy once stole. I'm counting the ways my life has improved since I learned to value myself. I'm counting friendships built on mutuality rather than utility. I'm counting interests pursued for joy rather than obligation. I'm counting peaceful nights of sleep, undisturbed by financial anxiety or emotional manipulation. Most of all, I'm counting the respect I earn every day by requiring it from others and giving it to myself. If my story sounds familiar, if you recognize yourself in the person who gives until there's nothing left, who loves until it hurts, who sacrifices until you disappear, please know that change is possible. Boundaries are learnable. Self-respect is recoverable. Relationships can heal when both parties commit to treating each other as valuable human beings rather than resources to exploit. It's never too late to matter in your own life. It's never too late to require respect from the people who claim to love you. It's never too late to discover who you are when you're not busy serving everyone else's needs at the expense of your own. The security camera I installed to catch a thief ultimately helped me catch something more valuable, a glimpse of the woman I'd always been underneath years of exploitation and self-sacrifice. She'd been there all along, waiting for permission to matter, waiting for courage to insist on respect, waiting for wisdom to understand that love and destruction don't belong in the same relationship. Now she's free, and so am I. Have you ever experienced something similar? Being used by someone you love, feeling invisible in your own family, discovering that your generosity was being taken for granted or exploited? Have you ever had to choose between being respected and being used? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It helps me continue sharing these difficult but important truths about love, family, and the courage to demand respect. Together, we can support each other in learning that we all deserve to matter in our own lives. Thank you for listening to my heart, and for opening yours to the possibility that it's never too late to transform pain into power, betrayal into boundaries, and exploitation into self-respect. The woman who once counted stolen money and security footage now counts her blessings every single day, and that blessing includes the knowledge that she matters, to herself, to people who truly love her, and to anyone who needs permission to value themselves enough to require respect from others. Your worth isn't measured by what you can give away. It's measured by how well you take care of the precious person you were born to be.